Welcome to CFO Focus Live. Now, here's our host, Aditi Roy.
Hello and welcome to CFO Focus Live. I'm Aditi Roy. We have a special episode for you today featuring an icon in the business world. His name is Peter Cuneo. Peter is known worldwide as a leader in turnarounds and helped turn around Marvel Entertainment and sold it to Disney for billions a few years ago. He's also on several public company boards and the board of the National Archives in Washington. Peter has a new book out with New York Times bestselling author Joe Garner, and they're both here to tell us a little bit more about it. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Hi. Very nice to be here.
Peter, let's start with you. The name of your book is aptly titled Superhero Leadership, 28 Ways to Lead with Courage, Strength, and Compassion. Tell us what prompted you to share your lessons in this book. Why is this needed now?
Well, I think it's needed more than ever. A little background. I've been giving speeches around the world for over 20 years. And quite a while ago, I came up with the 28 essentials for superhero leadership, which were basically lessons that I thought I learned in a life of leadership, simply put. And what I've been very concerned about recently is the lack of leadership in the world. And I like to say we have less good leadership than maybe ever in human history. I'm not sure that's true, but just turn on the news, any country, it doesn't matter. And that is concerning all of us, and me has concerned me for some time. The other thing that's concerning me is that young people are not learning leadership like they used to. Why not? And what can we do about it?
We're going to dive into these principles in just a minute. But first, I want to talk to you about being known as the turnaround CEO. You are iconic for it. What I find so noteworthy is you came into companies like Clairol, a women's hair care company, and Marvel, a comic book company where you really didn't have any subject matter expertise, and then turned them around. How did you earn the respect of the employees around you and then turn the companies around?
Well, I do have some principles on walking into a company and how I should behave and treat other people. And there are a number of things, but I never pretend to be an instant expert. This is a major cause of failure among leaders. They think that they need somehow to lose respect if they're suddenly instantly they can make a movie successful with no experience or publish a comic book with no, of course not. So I never pretended in any of my turnarounds where I had no background that I did. I had to learn. I think some of the other thing is you want to be honest with people. I know that's not always easy because you often delivering bad news, but in the end, people will respond more to bad news than no news. Communication, regular communication, honest communication. Communication is a lost art today in leadership. We have, because of technology, we've forgotten how to really communicate face to face, for example, or communicate things that really matter. Very important. And I think finally, show positive energy from minute one. You always want to be up. Sometimes as a leader, you have bad news. You have to be an actor or an actress. That's just what's required. That's part of the job. You know, you're not crazy telling people things that are not accurate, but it's very, very important. So I think those are things that I always thought about walking through the door.
Joe, when you hear Peter talk, even in talking about these turnarounds, what's noteworthy is his humbleness. He talks about these principles, but it's not about him. I can see how the two of you make such a perfect pair. He provides the great stories and you shape it into a kind of a hero's journey narrative, or rather a superhero's journey in this case. How did the two of you meet and then decide to collaborate?
Well, we started by working on a podcast called Superhero Leadership. And we did a season of them interviewing people from all walks of life, leaders from all walks of life, military as well as business, media, so forth. And at some point along the way, I can't point to the exact moment, but at some point along the way, because of my background in publishing, we thought it might be smart to compile all of this information that we were gathering into a book. And that's how Superhero Leadership, the book, came about.
Peter, you always say to remember the details of your failures. Don't remember your successes. That's one of your principles. Can you share one or two of your most meaningful failures and how you learned from them?
Well, I've never failed at anything, obviously. No, I'm kidding, of
There's that
course.
humility.
Of course. Of course. The one area that I think about right away is hiring. Okay. When you're hiring people for a certain position, and in my case, to take a senior position in a radical turnaround, you really have to think about, are they emotionally equipped to take on the challenge and the stress? There's a lot of stress, particularly early on. And have they shown that in their backgrounds and so on? And there have been a couple of times where my heart overruled my head. I interviewed people. I really liked them a lot personally. They had been very successful in other areas, but very different from a turnaround. And even though my head was warning me they're not going to work out, they're just, nothing wrong with them. It's just not in them, and it's not in everybody, and that's okay. They've been great elsewhere. I did hire them and came to regret it. In one circumstance, after a couple of months, I had someone I'd hired come to me and say, "Peter, I'm having a nervous breakdown." And he later, he left the company and later went back to the kinds of things he was doing before and did great. But I always felt personally responsible for the fact that he was having a nervous breakdown. That was on me. It still bothers me to this day, and this is 20 years ago.
You mentioned emotional readiness and the important to check for that. What are ways that you can detect for emotional readiness when you're interviewing someone?
Well, I think first of all, it's what have they done in the past and been successful? If you've worked for a gigantic company with 50,000 employees, you've been, going up the ladder, you've had hundreds of people reporting to you. Every time you want to make a decision, you had lots of money to spend on research, for example. And so, and now you're coming to a company where none of that exists. Okay? You're going to go with your gut on everything because there's no money for research, for example. And it's a whole different world. And you try to figure out whether they can make the leap, because frankly, most can't. And that's not a knock on these individuals at all. It's not for everybody. And I often say I'm nuts that I like to do these things. And I admit it.
You talked about the importance of hiring. Can you name one or two people that you hired, specifically, let's say at Marvel, who really helped you with the wins and in helping that turnaround?
Oh, there's a million people. First, let me start with Marvel's board of directors. Now, I didn't hire. There were a lot of new board members. We had some good board members to start, but we had a lot of new board members come in during the next 10 years between bankruptcy and selling to Disney that were outstanding. And one thing I will tell you, you've got to have to be successful in radical surgery on an organization. You've got to have a great board, a board that thinks like you, that will support you. And we did have on that board a lot of other, what I'll call turnaround executives. So that was very important to me. I discovered a lot of good people. It's just that the company had been through a ringer going through 2 years of bankruptcy, and good people had left because they lost faith in what would happen in the future and so on. But actually, I did bring in some good people. Joe Quesada, for example, became head of our comic book business, and later, after we sold to Disney, became chief creative officer of Marvel. Joe would be one example, but there are quite a few. But one of the great things about doing turnarounds is when you discover people already in the organization that were not allowed to flourish by past leadership. They were held down, and suddenly they blossom. It's really a cool thing to watch.
Joe, what's the most powerful leadership story you uncovered while working on this book?
There were 28. But, that's so hard. I mean, learning Peter's story from his days in the military to all the turnarounds, there were just so many. So I cheated here. I did make a note, and it's probably the Marvel refinancing and strategic reboot between 1999 and 2001, particularly the way he kept the company alive financially when bankruptcy era lenders wanted to liquidate, reframed Marvel's strategic core from publishing characters to character-based IP for multi-platform exploration, and finally, the way he built the discipline and board structure that ultimately enabled the sale to Disney. That's one of the hallmarks of this book is we're not telling other people's stories. These are all incredible experiences that happened, and these are firsthand. And so it really is just a great study in business, but also I would like to think a fun read.
Peter, Joe's mentioning finance structure and strategy. Most of the principles that you talk about have to do with really like soft skills. Which are more important, do you think?
Well, it's not a question, honestly, of more important. They're both important, and you've got to tackle and both of them, and you've got to practice both of them. It's not ever an either or. The best leaders are balanced in their approach to a lot of different things, and I think it's not a trade-off.
Yeah,
you want both.
And in high stakes turnaround situations, what is there one that matters more, speed or consensus? Because sometimes they can be at odds with one another.
Yeah, you're right. For me, again, I think it's the same answer. I think you need both. I think you want to sell your ideas to your organization, but in the end, you can only do so much selling, and if it hasn't worked, then you just have to be decisive and make the decision on your own. But again, you want people to understand that you care about what they think. Their opinions are valuable, whether you go in the direction they're recommending or not. Most human beings, if they feel they've been heard and valued, that's good enough. The fact that you make a decision that's not what they recommended is not the end of the world for them.
Joe, you have worked with many luminaries. How do you get people, and important people in the world, to trust you with their stories?
Well, I think an important characteristic of doing what I do is having a natural curiosity. I genuinely love hearing people's stories, and everybody has a story. And, whether it's a story that they've told 1,000 times or fresh, I try to always ask that next question that gets them to and I probably told Peter this early on in the process. What were you thinking? What did you feel in that moment? What, and really try to get at the emotional heart of these experiences, whether he's hiring or firing or restructuring. I mean, there's a human toll there. And it's just, I think it's the fact that I want to tell that human story that compels my subjects to want to share. And sometimes I've had the experience where they've gone, I hope I haven't shared too much.
Did you feel that
But
way, Peter?
I remind them as I reminded Peter, you have the red pen. Whatever stays, stays. Whatever goes, goes.
Yes, I felt that way almost every day that I talked to Joe. Having said that, his recommendations have been right 95% of the time. And once I saw them in writing and had my red pen, there wasn't too much red on the page because what he brought was very important. You can tell a story, but there's ways to tell a story and people will remember and learn from, and there's ways to have it flop, and Joe is great at helping me with all of that.
Another trade-off I want to ask you about. One of your principles is not to be imperious or self-important, be accessible. How do you balance confidence with humility in high-stakes situations?
Once again, I don't think they're opposites. I don't at all. And I would argue that some of the best leaders that I've in history and whatever were just that. They were both. They represented and projected both. And so I don't think it's one or the other at all.
Which leadership trait do you think people overestimate and which do you think they undervalue?
Good question. I've never had this question before, so this is actually great. I would say overvaluing is vision. You'll hear a lot of times great leaders have vision. And I may not be a great leader, but I have very little vision. I'm very good at taking other people's ideas and grabbing onto them and enacting them. But and how much vision could I actually have, as we talked about before, going into an industry, a company that I knew nothing about the industry? How could I have vision on movies? Going into Marvel, I read scripts. I never made a single change because I didn't feel qualified, and I wasn't. Comic books, I read the comic books after they were published. Why? Because I didn't have any skills. I'm going to tell people with 20, 30 years in those businesses what to do? No. So my vision was really other people's vision that I grabbed onto. One of my great peeves is I'm often interviewed with media, and I give credit to a lot of these people that I'm talking about, and it never appears in print. It's always the CEO is either a bum or a superhero. Unfortunately, that's the way of the world with the media right now. On undervalued, it's definitely diversity. There is so much power when you put a team that's diverse together with a specific goal in mind, because you're getting so many different views and you want to hear them all. You absolutely want to hear them all and weigh each one of them. And I will tell you that any success I've had, whether it was in college, in graduate school, in the U.S. Navy, I'm a Vietnam veteran. I did 2 tours on a guided missile destroyer. Tremendous diverse crew, 320 people. Okay, we did well. Okay, but that diversity that is strong. That lack of diversity or feeling that certain type of person is just not good is crazy. And I always want a diverse organization. And I will tell you right now, that's been 90% of my success, whatever success I've had.
Joe, what makes a C-suite leader's communication trustworthy rather than promotional?
Well, I think that you can, if you've been at it long enough, you spot authenticity. You can tell if if they're just, as the expression goes, blowing smoke, and especially if you're even slightly aware of the circumstances and what's happening and so forth. And I think that it's crucial. I mean, everybody, and I haven't met too many like Peter, but the people that I have, the successful ones, as Peter pointed out, whether it's good news or bad news, it's the authenticity and it's the truth. And that's what really sets great leaders apart from poor leaders.
Peter, I want to go back in your book to when you spoke about your first day at Harvard Business School. And what I found really noteworthy about that is that you felt like an imposter. People from the outside would never think you, with your experience, even at that point, because you had military experience, would ever feel imposter syndrome. Can you walk us through that?
Sure. Well, I think it comes first from my background. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood in Flushing, Queens, in New York City. Very diverse neighborhood. But my father was a lieutenant in New York City Fire Department. He had also been a Navy officer in the South Pacific, World War II, and in the Korean War. That's one of the reasons I went in the Navy later on. But my mother was an EMT for 30 years. So they were give back people. And I did fine. I went to public high school and all good and what have you. But I never viewed myself as an Ivy Leaguer. Going way back to when I was that age, a lot of us thought of the Ivy Leaguers as geniuses and from very rich families, frankly. which turned out not to be the case, but in many cases. But so the way I got to Harvard Business School was only to make my captain happy. I was getting out of the Navy after about 3.5 years, a little under 3.5 years. The my captain had gotten his doctorate from Harvard Business School. And I was offered a regular commission to stay in the Navy and make it a career. Regular commission is what someone who had gone to Annapolis gets. I went to officer candidate school. In 4 months, I was an officer. So I had a different, what's called a reserve commission. And I was not taken as seriously as someone who spent 4 years instead of 4 months, studying the Navy and so on. So that's fine. I knew that going in. But basically, I had done very, very well. I love the Navy. You love things, you do well.
Yeah.
And I was offered a regular commission, but I was recently married. And my wonderful wife said that she knew I would be at sea for 6 months a year if I stayed in. And she didn't want to raise the kids alone. We didn't have any kids yet, but I understood completely. So I said to the captain, I'm not going to stay in. He asked, what are you going to do? And he said to me, you should go to Harvard Business School. And I said to him, honestly, Captain, I don't see myself in the Ivy Leagues. I didn't even know Harvard had a business school. And the captain said one thing to me that I think about every day. He said to me, Cuneo, you don't know how good you are. And I took it at the time to be he's being nice to me. And this particular captain is one of my heroes in life, I have to say. So just to please him, I applied. And it's a long story, okay? There's a lot more to the story. But the point is, I got in. And when I showed up for registration in September, I honestly thought they sent me the wrong letter. They were going to say, we don't have anything for you. What are you doing here? They said they reached in the wrong pile. And they sent an acceptance when they want to send a rejection. But what happened was, after 3 months, so I felt like an imposter. I didn't belong there, but after 3 months, I realized not only did I belong there, I could really do well. I had academic honors. I was president of the International Business Club. So my captain, and by me just wanting to make him happy, it changed my life.
And I would say that when he said, Cuneo, you don't know how good you are, I absolutely agree with him. And there is that humility so early in your life's journey. Your last principle is know when it's time to go. Can you tell us about a time when you did that? And what were some of the signs?
Sure. So I've done 7 turnarounds. And the first one I was thrown into, I never thought about doing turnarounds or that I'd have any skills or success or whatever. But that worked out very well. And I started to get, frankly, addicted to turnarounds. I know it's crazy, but I just love that high that you get from working with a diverse group and being successful. And so typically I would stay 3 years on average, 3 years in a turnaround. By 3 years, even in a multinational organization, you're going to do well. And or you're doing well already, and you're going to do even better. And you want to leave it, at least I did. I wanted to leave it to the great leadership team we had built, doing that turnaround. So at Marvel, which I think is a good example, after about 2.5 years, or a little longer than that, I went to the board and said, you know what, we're doing great, which we were, and time for me to go. I got to look around for another turnaround, or I could go to the board or whatever. And the board said to me, Peter, we need you to stay another year, which I did. So at Marvel, I was almost 4 years as CEO before going on to be vice chairman of the board. But in my case, I'm not like everybody, but there is time to move on. There's time when you've learned what you're going to learn, you've experienced what you've experienced, and you don't want to stop growing. And I don't care what age you are. And I'm not going to tell you my age, but you could figure it out from some of the dates I've dropped here. But I'm still learning every day. And I love learning. And I feel it makes me better. What I'm learning right now is from young kids. I don't understand how they think. There are several generations after me. And it's a challenge. And when I talk about, okay, kids aren't learning leadership. What am I going to do about it? Well, I better understand them first. You know, so right now I'm in the process of learning a lot from young people. Not necessarily agreeing with them, but learning a lot, and so on. Never stop growing, never stop learning. So
Never
every
stop
new
growing.
experience for me was a new adventure.
Mhm.
I'm an adventurer, I guess, because my grandparents were all adventurers. Won't go into that now, but I grew up with risk takers as being normal, being natural.
Joe, is there a leader or luminary you haven't worked with yet with whom you'd like to work next?
Boy, that's a tough question. There is somebody whose biography I would like to do, and I've been working on it a little bit. I grew up in the 70s, and one of my heroes, being interested in broadcast and so forth, was Dick Clark.
Oh,
And so I've been sort of dancing around doing a Dick Clark, a definitive Dick Clark biography. And he was just, he was more than the man that stood behind the podium on American Bandstand. And his imprint on television, it remains today. He's been gone since 2012, and the New Year's Eve special that has
yeah.
been on for 40 years is still branded Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve with Ryan Seacrest. So
Yeah.
anyway, and there's so many, you can't throw a stone. I'm in Los Angeles, and you can't throw a stone in this town without hitting somebody that worked for him, worked with him, worked against him, or what have you. I mean, Bob Iger, the head of Disney, was a program
Mhm.
executive at ABC. So I could go on and on. But
Yeah.
he's somebody whose life is fascinating. And not just, he also owned the Krispy Kreme franchise in the UK. He owned cable distribution in Mexico. So he's quite an individual.
Yeah, so many surprises there, right? Because we think of him as
Mhm.
such a broadcasting legend and ageless, of course. I know you worked really closely with him, but those are definitely little vignettes that need
And
to be
very
brought out
quickly,
in the
that's
world.
something else that Peter and I shared is a love of pop music, top 40 music. Peter's got
Who
an
knew?
encyclopedic knowledge of pop music.
Well, my knowledge ends at about 1990.
Hey, it's not a bad place to end. And actually, my last question is usually what would surprise people about you? So I think you both answered that. I do have one final question for Peter. Peter, you mentioned part of the reason you wrote this book is a dearth of leadership, especially among young leaders today. Are there some exemplary leaders that you can name today? Who do you think's doing it right?
Well, Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett, I idolize for a lot of reasons. I think he really practices all 28 essentials in a way, or most of them, and he just came up with leaving his. I think he's worth 10 billion or some maybe more, gigantic number, and his kids are going to have to actually have 10 years to give away the entire amount. So not only was he very successful in his business, but he's highly altruistic. And I do believe in altruism, giving back. And even for young people, maybe they're not giving money, but they're giving their effort. I think it's very important. One of the elements for young people to learn leadership, to be out in the real world. I think the other person, no question about it, the most important leader that I've seen in my life has been my wife. She leads me around all day long, has for years. We're married 55 years, and I don't regret a day, even when she tells me I'm being a jerk. And she's always right, of course, but she has been a great leader, and I wouldn't be me or anything close to me without her.
And congratulations on your 55 years. That's
Thank you.
amazing. Peter and Joe, thank you so much for your time and thoughtful answers.
Oh, it was our pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And check out Peter and Joe's new book, Superhero Leadership from Skyhorse Publishing. That's it for this edition of CFO Focus Live. We'll see you again soon. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel and follow CFO Focus on LinkedIn and at cfofocus.org.